Hello Constant Readers, my name is Emily and this is my spoiler-free review of the second book in the Dark Tower series, The Drawing of the Three by Stephen King. This is part of the hashtag DT Project 17. You can follow me on Instagram and you can join us in the group. All of the information on this reading project is linked in the description box down below. If you haven't seen my last video on authorial intention and addressing your concern that I don't know that Stephen King is a living, breathing human being, I will leave that linked. Also, it sort of explains my position for this series. That being said, here's my disclaimer. 1, I am a first-time reader of this series, so if I'm saying things that don't make sense based on your knowledge of having read the whole series, that is why. I'm reading this and exploring this for the first time. And 2, as discussed in my previous video, links down below, I am not interested in authorial intentions. I am reading throughout this project to see how the Dark Tower series fits in the fantasy genre as a whole. So that is my intention with the series. So The Drawing of the Three was published in 1987. This is 5 years after The Gunslinger was published in 1982. And in between, King has written some of those classic works that I feel like he is well known for now. The ones that I have read include Christine, Pet Sematary, It, and The Eye of the Dragon. He has a little bit more experience under his belt. Something that I really didn't like about The Gunslinger was that it didn't really feel compelling. Like, it didn't really feel like the other things that I'd read by Stephen King, and I knew it was older, but it was hard to get into. It was hard to find interesting. I really didn't enjoy it. I can see now why I didn't continue with the series the first time I tried to read The Gunslinger as a kid. What I am seeing now with The Drawing of the Three is that experience that King has. In the gaps between the publication of the two books, he's published a lot of things. He has a lot of practice, and I feel like he's grown a lot as a writer, and I feel like we're probably going to see that as the series continues, so I'm looking forward to that. Definitely think that this story was far more compelling. It was such a pleasure to read. Now, part of me wonders if that's because this does not read so much like a fantasy novel. And I mean, I love fantasy. I wrote my master's on fantasy, so it's not that I don't like fantasy literature. What I think is maybe compelling about this novel specifically is that it gives me the familiar. So we start out in our secondary world. Roland is recovering from his encounter with the man in black that happened at the end of The Gunslinger. He is now moving forward on his journey to draw 3 people to join him on his quest. So we start out in the fantasy space, and then Roland finds a portal and moves through that portal into our world. So in fantasy literature, we have the primary world and the secondary world. So the primary world is our world. It's the mundane world. Rules of science and logic sort of apply there. And the secondary world is its own contained magical space in which the rules still have to function for us to believe it, but they are different from our own mundane world. So think about when in Narnia, the children move from like the World War II setting through the wardrobe into a magical forest in which it is always winter and never Christmas. And all of that works in its own space. Usually in the Portal Fantasy, these things are one way, from primary world to secondary world. So what we see in The Drawing of Three is a moving from the fantasy space, the secondary world, into the primary world. And so with that movement, we get a sort of familiarity with King's body of works. And I'm thinking that's maybe why I liked it better than The Gunslinger. King didn't really have to create anything fantastical. All he had to do was put a splash of the fantasy into the contemporary, into our lived primary world, which is basically what he does with all of his other novels. It's a primary world novel, and the magic sort of seeps in. The only difference is that normally we follow the perspective of a mundane experiencing the magic, but now we are following Roland, who is magic, experiencing the mundane. I really liked it. I loved the 3 breaks in the novel where Roland is collecting the 3 people that he needs to go on his quest. Each section was a breeze to get through. I loved the characters. My favorite character at this point is Odette. Her chapter is so interesting, and I would love to reread it. I have so many questions about Odette, and I think at some point in the future, I would like to devote a whole episode just to Odette. I mean, in terms of the journey that the Gunslinger actually goes on towards the tower, not much happens. He's just collecting people. One of my questions that I'm asking throughout this series is Roland a hero? Roland as our eyes to this fantasy world, as the fantasy protagonist, as our hero, as our gunslinger, should be a character we admire based on the rules of fantasy. But I feel like Roland as a character is quite complicated. He doesn't exactly fit the bill for a stereotypical fantasy hero. And so I feel like in this book, we really get more of that question complicated. I am not going to get a black or white answer, and I feel like this book does a lot in terms of developing that gray space for Roland. Roland is still not a character that I like, but I am fascinated by him. So yeah, I think I gave this book 4 to 5 stars on Goodreads. I really enjoyed it, and I would definitely reread it. I actually want to reread it. If you have read The Drawing of the Three, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Keep an eye out for my discussion video, in which I'm going to include some more spoilers and expand on some of the things that I've talked about here. Thank you so much for watching, constant readers, and I will see you soon. Bye.